This is a future world 100 years from now. Humanity has built a technological city in space, where lush greenery and pleasant weather prevail throughout the year. People here enjoy a serene life with 24/7 service from robotic servants and access to state-of-the-art medical pods that ensure they never fall ill or age. On Earth, there's rubbish as far as the eye can see. Environmental pollution and overpopulation have led to rampant disease on Earth. Although mankind's technology was already highly advanced, but they didn't think about changing the environment. The wealthiest individuals decide to escape Earth, using cutting-edge technology to establish a space city beyond Earth's orbit. This place becomes a dream destination for the impoverished, and they name it Elysium. Max, an orphan from a young age, dreams of going to Elysium. He used to read stories about Elysium with his best friend Fry. At that time, Max was determined to take Fry to Elysium with him. However, as Max grows up, he realizes the stark contrast between his dreams and reality. Life forces Max into a mundane job as a factory worker, enduring daily commutes and the constant surveillance of robots. The rich have robots patrolling the slums 24 hours a day to keep order. Whenever they suspect something, the robots will force a search. Citizens who attempt to resist face immediate punishment.
Misdemeanor citizen disobedience.
Come on, this is going to work, man.
Shit.
Nothing in there, is it?
Zero tolerance. Applies to all citizens.
Oh shit.
Despite a serious arm injury, Max rushes to the factory after a quick bandaging, as he depends on this job to survive. However, Max had not yet entered the workshop. By then, the supervisor had already caught up with him and deducted half a day's wages from Max for being late. But Max didn't dare to protest. He had to live on his job. The poor have no rights in this world. They even have a time limit for going to the toilet. Everyone longs to reach Elysium, but the average person cannot afford the exorbitant ticket prices. So where there's oppression, there's resistance. Spider leads an underground organization, managing to obtain the launch codes for 3 radar systems. He plans to impersonate an official spacecraft and transport civilians to space. However, he underestimates the enemy's defense systems. Just as his ship takes off, Elysium detects that the code is missing. Defense Minister Delacourt, upon receiving the notification, rushes to the command center. When it's time to issue a warning to the unauthorized spacecraft, Delacourt changes her mind. Knowing that a standard warning won't deter intruders, she orders the use of interstellar missiles, typically reserved for threats beyond Earth. Meanwhile, Kruger, lurking on Earth, also receives the ship's coordinates. As Delacourt orders the attack, he immediately fires 4 missiles, and all of this was observed by Spider, who couldn't believe that the space station would actually launch an attack on humans. Missiles flew towards the stowaway ship. Elysium was close at hand, but they didn't stand a chance. With a violent explosion, the 2 stowaway ships were directly blown to smithereens. The last ship, witnessing the fate of its companions, managed to evade the missiles. The ship landed quickly, and the stowaways inside swarmed out. They need to get out of here now, otherwise, the RoboCop will arrive and arrest them all. A woman carrying a child began to run. Her daughter had been unable to move since childhood. The reason she risked everything to reach Elysium was to use the advanced medical pods here to cure her daughter. As the medical equipment initiated, the treatment process was quickly completed. Watching her daughter finally able to walk, the mother embraced her with tears of joy. However, their actions had also exposed their location, and soon, robotic police arrived on the scene. Ignoring the girl's cries and the mother's pleas, they immediately arrested them both. As the robotic police began their operation, all the smugglers were soon apprehended and faced the fate of being sent back to Earth on the next available spacecraft. On the other side, Max's day at work was not going smoothly. He was responsible for machine number 34, which suddenly malfunctioned. His supervisor, upon hearing the commotion, rushed to the scene. To meet the daily work quota, he ordered Max to enter and repair the machine immediately. It was a highly dangerous task, and just as Max was about to refuse, the supervisor told him to leave immediately if he wouldn't go in. To keep his job, Max ultimately took the risk and entered. However, when Max finishes servicing the machine, the door closes unexpectedly.
No, stop! No!
Deadly radiation now filled the room, endangering his life. Seeing the commotion inside, Max's coworkers immediately grabbed tools to force the door open. Otherwise, their colleague inside would soon succumb to radiation. However, the supervisor arrived at the scene just in time. The expensive equipment, once damaged, was beyond their ability to compensate for. Disregarding Max's life, the supervisor promptly expelled everyone from the area. Only after the equipment had completed all its procedures did a robot finally drag Max out. But by then, Max had lost consciousness. When Max regained consciousness, he found himself in the medical ward. The robot informed him that he had been exposed to a lethal dose of radiation. He would soon experience severe organ failure and would die in 5 days. John, the owner of the factory, heard about the accident here and he soon arrived at the infirmary. However, he wasn't concerned about Max's condition. Instead, he interrogated the supervisor about why work had suddenly stopped. To prevent Max's skin from contaminating the sheets, he promptly ordered the supervisor to get Max out of there. So, after the robot forced Max to sign a document, it handed him a bottle of potent medication. It would keep Max's organs functioning normally until he died. Max returns to his rented room in despair, but his weak body makes it difficult for him to walk. Fortunately, his friend Julio noticed his condition and helped Max back to his room. At this point, tears streamed down Max's face. He didn't want to die like this. The only way to save himself was to go to Elysium and use their medical pods. However, even if they pooled their savings, they couldn't afford a ticket to Elysium. Holding onto their last hope, they sought out the leader of the underground organization, Spider. Upon learning of Max's situation, Spider agreed to send Max to Elysium. However, in exchange, Max had to do something for Spider, something none of his men had the courage for. Spider planned to kidnap a billionaire from Elysium who happened to be visiting Earth to inspect factories. Spider's objective was not to extort money but to obtain the information stored in the billionaire's brain, as he was the chief programmer for all of Elysium's systems. And this person, whom Max happened to know all too well, was none other than John, the factory owner who cared little about whether Max lived or died. To access the information, Max had to undergo a procedure to implant a computer chip into his brain, allowing him to download the data. However, Max's current physical condition was too weak. To enhance Max's combat capabilities, Spider decided to outfit him with an exoskeleton armor that could interface with the human nervous system. Then Max will be as powerful as a robot. Meanwhile, in Elysium, a trial was underway for Delacourt due to her unauthorized order to shoot down 2 spacecraft, resulting in the death of all on-board passengers. President Patel believed in handling illegal immigration discreetly, to avoid sparking further rebellion among the poor, and Delacourt has been using sleeper agent Kruger, who has multiple criminal convictions on his body, and who has been risk-assessed as severely mentally ill. President Patel issued a final warning to Delacourt, stating that if she acted independently and recklessly again, she would be stripped of all her authority. However, Delacourt had long been dissatisfied with President Patel. Using holographic technology, she immediately contacted John, the original builder of Elysium. John possessed a secret method to reboot Elysium. Delacourt planned to seize this opportunity to strip President Patel of his powers and then reprogram a new president. In exchange, John would take control of all defense systems and robotic operations. They would become the most powerful and wealthiest individuals on Earth. Meanwhile, Max, now fitted with the exoskeleton armor, had finally awakened. He needed to quickly adapt to the immense strength the armor provided. While Max was preparing for the kidnapping, John was also busy. He quickly edited Elysium's reboot procedure to prevent the program from leaking. John directly transferred the data into his own brain. Anyone attempting to use the program without the proper password would immediately suffer brain paralysis leading to death. When everything was ready, John simply scrapped the computers he had used. Accompanied by his robotic guards, he prepared to return to Elysium. However, just as John's spacecraft had taken off, Max had been lying in ambush near the factory. He fired a high-explosive shell directly at the target. An explosion rang out, and the spacecraft began an emergency descent due to engine damage. Max and the others are chasing after them. Meanwhile, news of John's peril reached Elysium, and to safeguard her plan from exposure, Delacourt immediately ordered her enforcer, Kruger, to protect John. The spacecraft quickly landed on the ground, and thanks to its robust protection, John remained unharmed. However, Max soon caught up to them. Just as they were about to forcibly open the spacecraft, John spotted them and immediately ordered the robots to eliminate everyone in the vicinity. The robots hurled grenades, and the would-be kidnappers were blown away just as they were about to attack. Then, the robots turned their attention to Max. Although he managed to evade the attacks, Julio, who was nearby, was unfortunately injured by the blast. Max rushed to rescue Julio, and upon seeing this, the robots unleashed a barrage of gunfire in his direction. Max successfully evaded the attacks, but the continuous assault forced the robots to reload their weapons. Seizing the opportunity, Max fired a specially crafted high-explosive round from his rifle, capable of causing damage within a 5-meter radius. Upon detonation, the robot was instantly reduced to rubble. With the threat eliminated, Max and his team once again surrounded the spacecraft. As an infrared cutting device activated, the spacecraft's armor was quickly sliced open. Upon seeing that the kidnapper was Max, John's expression turned notably cold. However, Max paid no attention to this. Just as Max was preparing to forcefully take John away, he discovered that there was still a robot hidden inside the spacecraft. Seeing that it was about to launch an attack, one of Max's comrades opened fire prematurely. However, the man had been scared out of his wits during the previous battle, and John was the first to be hit by his indiscriminate firing. Subsequently, the robot's weapon was knocked out of its hands. It began charging directly towards them, and conventional weapons were ineffective against it. Max immediately lunged at the robot. Max's exoskeleton armor provided him with immense strength, but in close combat with the robot, he realized he was outmatched. All the robots were programmed for combat, and they could anticipate attacks in advance. Max was soon outmatched and thrown away. Just as the robot prepared to pursue and finish him off, it unexpectedly revealed a vulnerability. Max seized the opportunity and kicked the robot out of the car. He then firmly grabbed the robot's neck and, with the strength of his exoskeleton, ripped the robot's head off. Once the threat was eliminated, Max quickly rushed toward John. A bullet had hit John in the chest earlier, and there was no time to take him back alive. So, they prepared to sync the data right there. However, after the data transfer was completed, they realized that all the data had been encrypted, and at that moment, Delacourt's backup arrived. The fighters immediately locked onto them. As the attack program initiated, 2 missiles hit Max's car directly. Kruger, seeing the situation, immediately pressed the detonation switch. With a deafening explosion, the escaping car was instantly blown into the air. Fortunately, the car was specially modified and Max miraculously survived the explosion. However, the fighter jet was now slowly descending. Max had just crawled out of the wreckage when Kruger approached him. Catching Max off guard, Kruger thrust a knife into his abdomen. He then drew another knife from his back. As Kruger prepared to finish Max off, Julio, who had also survived the explosion, diverted Kruger's attention. Max sees this and rushes to pick up his weapon on the floor, while Julio is then under attack by Kruger, who stabs him through the entire chest. Seeing that his best friend died to save him, the angry Max immediately raised the weapon in his hand. Kruger, noticing this, hastily activated an energy shield. Though the shield could deflect bullets, the powerful shockwave from the exploding high-explosive round sent Kruger flying. However, Max had no time to continue the attack. As enemy fighter jets were rapidly landing, Max immediately began to flee the scene. Yet, during the recent battle, satellites had already identified Max's true identity. In order to fulfill her plan, Delacourt needed the data stored in Max's brain. As a result, the military initiated a citywide manhunt for him. Although Max was able to escape from the trail by hiding under a livestock truck with the help of an old man. However, Max has been seriously injured in the battle and will die of blood loss if he is not treated. Desperate and with no other options, Max remembered that his childhood friend, Fry, was a nurse. He quietly made his way to the hospital. Just as he was on the verge of losing consciousness, he finally spotted Fry emerging from the hospital. Fry took Max to her room. As Fry began to tend to Max's wounds, she noticed a special tattoo on his abdomen, a symbol of their childhood pact. The pattern represented their enduring friendship. When Max woke up again, he realized that his injuries had been treated. Fry, hearing the commotion, rushed into the room, eager to know what had happened. However, Max understood that revealing the truth to Fry would only put her in danger. Ignoring Fray's pleas, he promptly left the room, but as soon as Max stepped outside, a drone quickly spotted his trace in the sky. Faced with the drone's surveillance, Max urgently took cover behind a parked car. He removed the rearview mirror to assess the situation, but the drone immediately identified his identity. Seeing that his location was compromised, Max smashed the rearview mirror into the drone, buying himself some time. Max then returned to the underground organization. Having completed the agreed-upon transaction, he was ready to head to Elysium. However, Spider informed Max that since the recent incident, the space station had not only closed off the airspace but also disrupted all flight signals. No one could currently travel to Elysium. Max freezes in his tracks at this news. His time is running out. The fear of death explodes Max's emotions. But then Spider told Max, if Elysium is taking this incident so seriously, It means that the data Max grabbed is very important. There might be a way to reopen the airspace. Spider immediately began examining the data stored in Max's brain. It was then revealed that this data contained the program to reboot Elysium, which could rewrite the entire system. Spider was ecstatic upon discovering this information because it meant that they could open the borders and make everyone a citizen of Elysium, potentially saving all of Earth's inhabitants. But to decode the data would take at least 5 days, and Max's physical condition couldn't endure that long. Although the data can change the fate of all mankind, they can't save him. Max just wanted to live, so he got up and left. Seeing that Max's mind was made up, Spider didn't force him to stay. Spider quietly left a tracker on Max's body, and then let him leave. When Max gets outside, he goes straight to the drone he destroyed earlier. Kruger gets a signal right away. They started heading toward Max's position at top speed. However, Max had no intention of fleeing. As the spacecraft arrived, he retrieved a bomb from his person. Max knows that the data in his head is extremely important, so he used it as a threat to get him to go to Elysium and use the med bay. This tactic worked, and Kruger hesitated to take any rash actions. Kruger reluctantly agreed to transport Max to Elysium. However, when Max boards the ship, he discovers that Fry and her daughter have also been captured here. It turns out that just after Max left, Kruger found Fry. Max was in a hurry to leave because he didn't want Fry to be hurt, but he didn't expect Fry to be implicated because of him. Learning that the target had been apprehended, Delacourt immediately lifted the airspace blockade and the ship began to take Max to Elysium. Meanwhile, Spider learns that the no-fly zone has been lifted, and he immediately begins to pinpoint Max's location. Upon seeing that the target is heading for Elysium, Spider immediately walks towards the ship with 2 of his men as well. As they neared the space station, just as the spacecraft was about to land, Kruger launched a surprise attack. Kruger aimed to seize the bomb from Max. The ensuing battle caused the spacecraft to lose control, and the bomb fell amidst the chaos, with the ship tumbling. Max's bomb landed near Kruger. A violent explosion occurred, severely disfiguring Kruger's face. The ship also lost power in the explosion and fell back towards the ground quickly. Luckily, the materials used in the ship are strong enough. Although the outer wings were smashed to pieces, the main body of the ship was still fortunately saved. When Max woke up, he realized that the little girl had lost consciousness during the crash. Max hurriedly told them to get out of here first, while he stayed behind to hold off the enemy. After Fry and her daughter managed to escape outside, they found themselves in a dreamlike city. Without hesitation, Fry rushed towards a nearby building. Inside the luxurious mansion, Fry indeed found a medical chamber and quickly placed her daughter inside. However, the system's scan did not detect valid identity information, rendering the medical chamber unable to provide treatment for them. Soon, pursuing soldiers arrived at the scene. Ignoring Fray's pleas, one of the soldiers electroshocked her into unconsciousness. At that moment, outside the mansion, reinforcements sent by Delacourt had arrived. Under their attack, Max was quickly electroshocked into unconsciousness again. When Max woke up once more, he realized that he was tightly bound. Crews are preparing to extract data from his brain. Since the data was interconnected with Max's nervous system, exporting it would mean Max's imminent death. And yet Delacourt couldn't care less if a poor man lives or dies. Seeing that he was about to die, a powerful desire to survive sent Max's hormones soaring. He ignored the sedative and reactivated his exoskeleton armor. With his sudden attack, the staff were no match for him. He broke free from his restraints and removed the neural transfer device from his mouth. Just as Max was about to rescue Fry, the radiation in his body suddenly intensified. On the other side of the room, Kruger, who was already dead, was pushed into a medical pod. This is the most advanced medical chamber on Earth. As long as the brain is not damaged, any injury or disease can be easily healed. As the instruments initiated the treatment process, Kruger's severely damaged head began to rapidly regenerate. Upon the completion of the treatment, the once dead Kruger miraculously came back to life. Delacourt arrived at the scene, her first words blaming Kruger for not completing his mission. However, Kruger's heart was already extremely twisted after his resurrection, and he already knew Delacourt's plan. Seeing that Delacourt was still talking on and on, Kruger couldn't contain his anger any longer, and he directly stabbed Delacourt's neck. Now Kruger wants to capture Max and take the data from his brain. Then he will be the new master of Elysium. Kruger then orders his men to create explosions everywhere so that the Elysium guards won't have time to deal with them. Meanwhile, Spider, taking advantage of the turmoil in Elysium, discreetly made his way there with his team. Max, after passing by the surveillance room, spotted them and quickly contacted Spider. After this series of events, Max had already figured out a lot of things.
You know how to get it out, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yes.
You're sure?
He agreed to hand over the data from his brain, but first, he needed to rescue Fry. In anticipation of potential upcoming battles, Max directly swallowed all the powerful drugs. On the other hand, Kruger has implanted a more advanced equipment to deal with Max's exoskeleton device. As Kruger searched for Max, he had no idea that Max had silently infiltrated their base. Max launched a surprise attack, hurling one of Kruger's henchmen through the air. Using the immense strength of his exoskeleton armor, Max slammed the henchman forcefully onto the ground. However, another one of Kruger's men arrived on the scene, wielding a weapon. Looking at him with a weapon in his hand, Max had to duck behind a cover first. As the enemy ran out of ammunition and began reloading, Max seized the opportunity and retaliated with a weapon of his own. When the immediate threat was neutralized, Max found Fry and her daughter. The child needed urgent medical attention, but she lacked the necessary legal identification code. Max instructed Fry to go to the medical chamber and wait, assuring her that he would resolve the issue shortly. They split up immediately. Next, Max must take out his last enemy. The motorized door beside him suddenly opens, and it turns out that Spider has also arrived. Just when they were looking for Kruger together, I didn't realize Kruger, being more familiar with the surroundings, quietly approached the group from behind. One of Spider's henchmen was instantly killed by an explosion. Max picked up a weapon and immediately began to fight back. However, Kruger had already activated his energy shield, rendering the bullets ineffective. Furthermore, the explosion had triggered the fire alarm in the area. Max and his group had no choice but to prepare to leave, but Kruger had no intention of letting them go. He immediately pursued Max. Kruger used his mech's power to jump right in front of Max. Seeing that Kruger was already rushing towards him with a weapon in his hand, Max's body had a problem at that moment. He could only raise his arm to block hastily. Seeing that Max was completely defenseless, Spider, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. With a sudden charge, he tackled Kruger to the ground, but as Kruger counterattacked, Spider was immediately stabbed through the palm of his hand and nailed to the ground. In this time, Max finally recovered, and he quickly rushed up to fight with Kruger. Kruger, however, not only has more advanced armor, but he also has a lot of combat experience. Max, previously just a regular worker, was no match for him. However, after gaining a temporary advantage, Kruger started taunting Max. Seizing the opportunity, Max immediately lunged at Kruger. He jumped behind Kruger and ripped off the control switch for the exosuit, causing Kruger intense pain, which made him collapse. Seeing that he has no chance of winning, Kruger pulls the bomb from his body. Then he chained Max to himself and he was going to die with Max. Just in the nick of time, Max used the incredible strength of his exoskeleton armor to rip the rope off. Max immediately threw Kruger down. After everything settled down, Spider led Max to the control center. Their plan was to reboot Elysium, and Spider would grant legal citizenship to everyone. However, Spider stumbled upon a problem. The data had fused with Max's brain. Once the program started, it would destroy Max's brain, making it impossible to save him, not even in a medical pod. Yet, Max had known about this all along. As President Patel and his guards arrived on the scene, Max personally pressed the reboot button. With Max's death, Elysium's reboot program immediately initiated. Once the core update was complete, everyone became legal citizens of Elysium. Fry, watching her daughter wake up in a medical pod, couldn't hold back her tears. She knew that Max had sacrificed himself for all of this. Subsequently, the system detected many patients on Earth. Elysium dispatched emergency ships to Earth for medical aid. Upon learning this news, people on Earth rejoiced. This is the moment when all are finally equal. In the end, Max traded his own life for the rebirth of countless people on Earth. He had never imagined that one day he would become a savior. All he had wanted was to survive. In his final moments, Max recalled the words he had spoken to Fry when they were children.